Hello and welcome back to Samurai Flag channel. My name is Marielle and today I'm going to be interviewing my parents who visited Japan for the first time in 1994. Now let's introduce my parents. Okay, Mom and Dad, can you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Donna.
And I'm Larry.
Okay, we filmed a video back in April when they visited Japan. So they visited Japan in 23 this year too. And at that time, we filmed a video together for Samurai Flag channel, and many people commented that they wanted to learn more about the trip in 1994 because it was quite rare for foreigners to visit Japan at that time. Also, I, as their daughter, was very interested to learn more. Of course, I heard about their trip when I was a child and it got me interested in Japan, but I want to know more in detail, so let's do that today. By the way, I also have my own channel and it's called On the World Stage, so if you want to check that out and see some videos from our trip in 2023, then you can view that on my channel. It's in the description. Okay, let's get started. When and why did you choose to visit Japan?
I had a friend who was working in Japan. He had actually gone to Japan for a year during high school on a Rotary exchange where he lived with a Japanese family and learned Japanese. He was a college buddy of mine, and we stayed friends, and he wound up coming to our wedding, and he would speak to me from Japan every once in a while, and we would talk about, maybe one day we'd go. And then he actually had a conversation with me after the wedding where he said, if you want to really come visit me in Japan, you should come during cherry blossom season, which was coming up, and you could stay with me. I had an apartment in Tokyo that was rather large, and he said, I can save you the money, you could stay with me most of the time. And then I spoke to Donna, and
that made it possible for us because at the time we were saving for like a dining room set, and to go to Japan probably was a bit of a luxury, but to have a place to stay was perfect. And we love to travel, and
we just jumped.
We jumped at it. I said, forget the dining room set. Let's go to Japan.
We had never really envisioned going to Japan. No. Other than friends who worked in Japan, we didn't know people who were there, so it was exciting.
Yes.
So you were saving money for something for your home and then suddenly changed the plan because you wanted to go to Japan, of all places.
We had and we didn't know much about Japan years ago. I mean, maybe we'd go to a Benihana restaurant, or I had one experience in 1988 when I worked on a short little scene in a New York love story, and I met Mazukazu Tamura, and I didn't know at the time that he was a big celebrity or anything like that, but always in the back of my mind, it would be really interesting to visit Japan.
Well, and we knew we had no children yet. So when were we going to go to Japan if we had little kids and we were planning to start a family? So it was really the right time. Perfect. He asked, and it just seemed like this was a better decision. Let's go to Japan, even if we have to use some of the savings, and then we'll deal with that when we get back, and we'll have an adventure, because we really knew very little about Japan.
Sure.
Yeah, all of this has occurred before I was even born and before my sibling was born too. Okay, next question is, did you gather like any kind of information? Did you do any sort of planning for your trip? If so, how did you do that without the access to the internet like we have it today?
Well, it was difficult. There was no YouTube or any social media at the time. So what I did was I went to the library and I'd gotten a tour book, just a simple one, and then also a Japanese-English dictionary, and that's what we went over with. I read that.
We took it with us.
And got a little bit of information about that. We used the dictionary to try to learn a few phrases.
And then basically we were going to visit my friend, and he said one of the advantages for you coming to visit and stay with me is you'll go travel, but I'll tell you where you should go travel during this trip, and I'll tell you what you should go see. So he was a major source of information for us before and once we arrived.
And I do have to say that I had taken a course at college where I learned the cross-fertilization of Eastern Western culture. And one of the slides I had seen from my professor who had been to Japan was of Kinkajou, which was the Golden Pavilion. And I really had it in my mind that I want to see this place.
Kinkakuji in Kyoto?
Yes, it's a golden pavilion, and we did. We went to
You've
see
seen
the
pictures
golden
of it
pavilion,
that we have.
and it was more beautiful in person.
Yeah.
So something I want to go back to is you mentioned bringing this English-Japanese dictionary. So something that people don't really have to worry about much anymore when traveling in Japan is the language barrier because of Google Translate. So they can use the photo option on Google Translate and even at times the recording option to talk to someone. So what was that like being in Japan before that kind of technology existed?
We did walk with that little dictionary with us, and we pulled it out several times and asked people, like when we were sometimes lost, we would stop someone. But fortunately, Japanese, as we had heard, we found Japanese, although they may not have spoke English, would be very polite and stop if we asked for help. And sometimes it didn't work out, and we have one incident that particularly we've both never forgotten, because to us, we've told so many people a story. We stopped a woman on the street, but she spoke no English and she was in a rush. So she did something that was very helpful. Is she actually walked us to a police booth where somebody in the booth, one of the police officers, was able to speak English with us. It was very different back then. There were definitely less English speakers than there are now. So that was more difficult. There were no iPhones. There was no Google Translate.
But the wonderful thing was how helpful, obviously, if they saw us with the book, whatever, Japanese people would make an attempt to try to communicate. For example, like when we went to Kyoto, I had in my tour book where I thought we would stay, which I thought was within our budget. And the people at the information booth, even though they didn't speak English very well, they saw and they're, no,
you're not going to stay there.
we're not going to stay there. And they actually called up the Kyoto Kokusai Hotel, which was across the street from Niju Castle, which they knew we wanted to see. And we were overwhelmed. We went to this beautiful hotel and we had a traditional Japanese room.
You've seen pictures of that too.
Yeah, how helpful. And, obviously they were trying to help.
And that's a big difference from today also. So we were with my friend in Tokyo and we knew we were going to go to Kyoto, but we didn't know where we were going to stay. Today we have everything. We literally were figuring it out while we were there. And then we got there and spoke to this information person who said, no, you'll stay in this nice Japanese hotel, even though in the hotel, virtually no one could communicate with us at all. Like we couldn't speak to anyone, even the hotel staff. This is a little bit different than we have, although we encountered that in the recent trip in some places in the north. But then in Kyoto, I don't think we've encountered that anymore. But back then in the hotel, they did not speak English, but we were able to communicate with things.
I believe you were staying in a ryokan, like the type of Japanese hotel that provides the meal and has a tatami room. Is it like that?
No, it was not a ryokan. They put us in, it's a hotel that has become another hotel. And actually, I think it's now in the Intercontinental chain now. If you look, I guess, whatever's across the street from Niju Castle. But it was a more of, I guess, Japanese run hotel. And it was not, I wish we have not stayed in a ryokan. So that's on our to-do list.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Kyoto at a ryokan, when I moved to Japan, I stayed at one with my friends. And they didn't speak any English at it, even when I moved here. So,
But Kyoto Kokusai, that's a picture at the front of the hotel on the sign.
Oh, wow.
That's it.
Okay, so when you actually arrived in Japan, can you tell me in detail, if you can remember, about your arrival and first impressions?
We arrived through Narita Airport.
Right, Narita Airport. And the signage were able to train. So we ended up in Tokyo Station. And I remember asking Larry how we were going to find our friend. But
I had spoken to my friend beforehand because we arrived at Narita. We took a train from Narita to Tokyo Station. It was on a weekday and we'd be arriving, I recall, during rush hour. And I knew Tokyo Station from what little I read was super busy in the trains. That was one reputation Japan had, was super busy trains and train stations. So I said to him, how are we going to find you? And this was the beginning of something we didn't really fully understand before we got there that comes up. He said to us, because he's over 6 feet tall and has light hair, I think he's really of Swedish background, although he's American, but his family's history. But and Donna being tall and blonde and the way we'd be dressed, he just said to me, he goes, it doesn't matter where you are in Tokyo Station, I'm going to see you and you're going to see me.
And I'll describe, so we entered Tokyo Station diagonally, imagine like maybe where the big rotunda is. I'm on one end of it coming down the stairs with your dad, and then on the opposite side of the station, there's our friend coming down the stairs, literally waving over a sea of Japanese commuters. We're like, oh, we saw each other right away.
Literally the minute we got in there, we saw
it. So it was like, where's Walter right away? So then I've since had that experience, and that was also shocking to me, just walking. I remember, I think now in hindsight, it was probably Shibuya. So I'm here in the middle of Shibuya looking around, and there's, especially me that I'm blonde, there was no other blonde person, any direction. Plus, I've never had that experience. That was the first time I've had that experience in my life.
In 1994, she also was wearing a leather jacket and boots. Like, we looked very different. Most people were dressed for work.
And longer.
Very long. She had very long. And it was noticeable that people were looked startled to see her walk down the street like that. Like, it was noticeable. And you've seen pictures of children with her that we have. Like, they would come up to her and ask for like an autograph or to talk to her. Like,
which I loved.
Which was very funny.
The children.
Yeah, so that was a big thing. That was different in 1994 than now, because I think so many Japanese were not used to seeing visitors as much in person as well when we went places. So, but that was how we got there, and my friend found us, and we went to his apartment.
Yes.
So, Mom, how many times do you think that happened, that people
repeatedly
wanted to take a photo with you, or
any place I were, especially
at
like the temples, like Hayama Zadera with children, or especially we went to Tokyo Tower, and I remember there was this cute little boy, and he wanted to take a picture with me, but he was afraid to speak to me, so his friend, who knew a little English, said he wants to take a picture with you. And I took a little picture with these two little boys, and but it happened multiple, like I said, temples, probably tourist sites, because we also admired that we would see the Japanese children in their uniforms traveling together in groups at all the famous sites that we were going to see. That was
also a big thing. Like, you wouldn't see that as much. School trips go to things in the US, but like we did go to a lot of temples and sites, and we saw significant amounts of school children in uniform at them. Also, more so than in 1994 than we did this more recent visit. So that was very noticeable to us. But another thing that I remember specifically is that I think my friend told me that they actually had been told to do this by their teachers, because some of these students came from outside the Tokyo area to the temples, that they were told they might see foreigners. And because I said, they keep asking us if we'll exchange money with them, which was true. We had kids come up and ask to exchange money.
Right, could we exchange a coin? That's what they were told.
And he said they were told that was a way to go up and introduce themselves, or have an excuse to speak English to us, or practice speaking to us, or to say something. So we would be asked, it happened several times, would we exchange money with the kids? And we did. Like, we would give them American dollars and stuff.
But I remember you even said one time, I think, because the yen
they were
was
getting
so
a better
strong.
deal, I said.
I was like, right. They weren't getting it, we were getting the better deal, right? If they were giving us the yen, and we were giving them the
yen has changed a lot since then.
The yen was worth a lot more.
The yen was, so it felt like our money was worth less, as anyone would know listening now.
Right.
Who's older and was around then, the American dollar exchange rate is better now. So when we went to see you recently, it felt like our money went further.
Yeah, that's definitely a very big change to now, and we'll talk about that in our next video. Something that I want to ask about is the food. Had you had Japanese food before visiting Japan?
Not much at all. I know just in our, back in the day, maybe there was like Benihana. I think there was one Japanese restaurant I was aware of.
I had,
so many things were new.
Well, yeah. I mean, we were only recently married. I had grown up going to some places. Like, there were a few Japanese restaurants. There are way more Japanese restaurants and Japanese food in the US than there were in 1994. There was a famous one, it still exists, called Benihana. And, we brought you there. And that wasn't necessarily traditional Japanese food, I also know, but they introduced a lot of things in the US and sushi and stuff. But there were some that I'd been to, but not like when you grew up, where we really started bringing you to a lot of places. now there's so much more available here, but back then we really didn't have a very wide experience with Japanese food.
Right.
Yeah.
And then going there, I mean, I remember like when we were at Kaimizadera in that area, and I remember the
Especially
first time
treats.
we had the treats, the matcha
Almost none.
cakes
Yeah.
with the red bean paste in it,
Yeah.
and I fell in love with them. They're still my favorite, you know.
Yeah.
You really liked the daifuku, and it was your first
Daifuku,
time to
yes,
have it.
and there was, I remember getting them there, right? So imagine by Kaimizadera, and there was a
Right.
bakery, and we got these treats, and
It
they were
was
absolutely
cool.
delicious.
It was cause of that
Mhm.
that you grew up experiencing that, because I worked in New York City, which of
Mhm.
course is one of the few places in the US you would have real
Mhm.
choices, but I had never focused on it or searched for them. But after the trip,
Sure.
I searched out, there was a famous, very high-end Japanese, it's kosher, but also the pastry, the dessert shop that
Mhm.
was in Rockefeller Center. It was a dessert shop in Rockefeller Center, and I used to bring you guys treats from there.
Mhm.
But I never looked for that before this. After the trip, I focused on finding
Mhm.
these places. Also, there was the Japanese shop downtown where I brought you guys all sorts of treats, and eventually, as years later, Pocky and everything else.
Mhm.
But that was partially triggered by our really enjoying our trip and the
Right.
foods and things we had experienced.
And the other thing that that I had never had before until Kyoto, and it happened on a night where we were sightseeing all day, and all the restaurants had closed, and I was so hungry, and we'd go back to the hotel, and I had a bowl of udon with an egg on it, and probably the radishes and whatever. And it's like what they gave me. It was the most. First of all, I was hungry, and it was so delicious. The thick udon noodles, and I had never had it before. And then I just fell in love with that.
That was late at night. There was nowhere else to eat, and we loved it. And you've since had that, and we have that.
Right.
There's a picture of Mom eating that bowl in the bar.
And how happy I am.
We've shown you.
How satisfying.
Sitting there with that bowl. That was that night when we had gotten lost and everything was
Right.
closed.
And
So were there any types of eateries that you had never experienced before in Japan?
Conveyor belt sushi.
Yes.
Never seen that before. That was the only time. No one we knew had ever heard of that. Now you have some in the US and in New York, but never had seen that. That was fun. We told so many people about that.
Stacking the plates. Oh, and then our friend took us, let's go out for sticks. I'm like, sticks? And he took us to yakitori
He took us to a
place, and,
yakitori
and they were delicious
Right,
too.
he knew all the, he had been living, by the time we were there, this is now, he's out of college working for a company in Japan. He had lived in high school a year, but now he had been working there 6 years. If you close your eyes, he sounded perfectly Japanese. You would have no idea. And he had lived there 6 straight years at that point. He knew where everything was, and he also entertained and took people out for work and stuff. So we had the advantage that he took us out to some really interesting places we would never have seen. He also took us out one night for shabu shabu right after work, and it was a wild scene in the restaurant where people were partying in there. There was a lot of drinking. People were it was very boisterous. It was loud. It felt like a party.
And never had that before. And
We had
that's
never
another
had that
thing
before.
And to put the meat in the broth, and then have the broth at the
Right.
end.
That
Just
was
loved
another
it.
new thing.
I remember coming home and telling people about that experience. And I don't think we had it since until years later when we went back to Japan.
You know that I still somehow have not had shabu shabu in a restaurant. Yeah, after all this time. So I definitely need to make a video of eating that. Okay, so moving on, was there any way that your image of Japan changed on that trip? What did you think of Japan before going there? And then after going there, how did your perspective change?
I felt, I think my image had changed a lot. A lot of it was unknown, and only I heard anecdotal stuff. Heard it was safe and clean, but really didn't know what to think of it. I thought of it as, even then, a bit of a sort of techie-oriented place, and I thought, we saw movies, and you thought of it as a place that we'd have a hard time visiting or doing things, and that it would be closed off to foreigners, even though there were not many visitors or tourists, of course, when we went at that point. We saw very few.
Right.
But what changed was we came back realizing, because I thought it was going to be a very old world, the trains, the Shinkansen, we were so impressed and how beautiful everything and clean it was. But we also realized, yes, I also had experiences through work. I knew of things being very, what I would call, rule-oriented. And in fact, my friend made a point of showing us some examples of that while we were there. Like, I think that's actually changed a little bit since we've been there. But compared to the US, where very often things just whatever, do what you want. In Japan, we realized it wasn't quite that way. And I saw that. But at the same time, it was just amazing how beautiful and easy it was to get around.
Wait, before we move on, Dad, can you give an example of what you mean that they're very rule-oriented?
Well, for instance, we talked about, there are a couple examples. I had examples from work, like very exacting about things where it may not sometimes be necessary. I still work with people in Japan from time to time. That has also changed, and even when you visit, it's changed. But when we were there, and I'm not saying this is bad, I actually think there's a very good reason for this. Like the Shibuya Scramble is a great example of brilliance in, it's almost like a ballet,
right,
the lights change. Because in New York, it's chaos.
No.
But when we got there, he stood on a corner with us in Tokyo. There were no cars. This is 1994. No one would cross the street. And he said to us, we're going to step into the street. He goes, and no one's going to follow us. Maybe a young kid will follow us, or a teenager who wants to be different. That's what he said.
So
and he goes,
Cowboys.
and they're going to look at us.
True. That's so true.
This is what he said. Now, I don't know, but this was him. He lived there 6 years. He said, so my friend on the corner said that some people, if we went to step into the street against the light, nobody would follow us. Maybe a teenager would do it because they don't care, or they were going to follow us. But he said, otherwise, everyone's going to look at us and be like, look at those cowboys. Look at those foreigners breaking the rule or doing what they shouldn't do. But they're going to stay on the street even though there are no cars. And that was a big deal because in New York City, people just walk across the street as long as there's nothing ready to hit them all the time. And they go in any direction or across the intersection, so it's very different attitude. So that was unique. That was an example.
Sure.
He gave me one other quick example where we went to a video store where they knew him. He lived right next door to it. Back then you had to take out a video to watch a movie, and we were taking out a video, and we were going to walk right next door on a beautiful day, and he had the video, and he said that if he tries to walk out, that she was going to stop him. And he told me before this happened, he said, and I'm going to ask her, why can't I take the video? I live next door and it's a nice day. And he said she's not going to give any other explanation except because it's the rule that he said. And she's going to tell him. And they had this little exchange, and then she put it in this really nice, of course, this perfect package to protect it. Because one thing I will say is I'm amazed by the convenience and the packaging in Japan. That actually was something that amazed us while we were there too.
And the other thing I was amazed about too was, for example, we went to the Imperial Gardens, and during a lunch break, and there were no trash receptacles, and we're
it's mind blowing for a New Yorker.
And like we had picnicking, whatever. I says, and our friend pointed out, everyone's going to take their trash. Put it in a bag and carry that bag back to their office.
And there are pictures
which I
that
thought
you
was
have.
Beautiful. And we did that, and look how clean and beautiful.
There are pictures where you see us holding the bag, mom's holding the bag. But that, that has
not changed. That has not changed at all.
Not changed.
But that was a really big culture shock in a way, because there was no litter anywhere, but there were no garbage cans. And to a foreigner, that's like, how could that be? I will say also really quick that people have a misimpression. I see it all the time. I see it in Travelocity, or not Travel, in these different sites about Japan. People will say that they got rid of the public garbage cans after 9/11. I go, no, that's not true at all. There were no public garbage cans when I was there in 1994. It has nothing to do with 9/11.
I actually know the reason. They're very misled about 9/11. They are mixing up terrorist attacks. There was a terrorist attack using a garbage can in Japan.
And I remember that.
Yeah, so they're totally misled about it.
But the point being that Japanese kept everything clean. The park was beautiful. We carried our garbage out. We saw tons of people in business suits carrying their garbage out. That was an amazing thing to see. And how that...
Not also, that when you were at a vending machine, you actually drank whatever was at the vending machine. The receptacle was there. We weren't walking and drinking.
We didn't see people walking and eating.
People weren't walking and
almost not at all.
Not like you'd see people with a pizza walking around in New York. So that was very...
Okay, thank you so much for telling me more about your trip. It was really interesting, and the photos were so fascinating as well. I think that the photos are very rare, so thank you, Dad, for keeping them so nicely. Thank you so much for watching. next time we are going to be talking about their return to Japan when they visited me this year, actually. So post-COVID, and kind of our experience, and also talking about our time when we were separated for 3 years. So we're going to talk about that in the next video. So please keep an eye out for that. Please subscribe to Samurai Flag channel. And also, if you want to see some actual videos from the trip this year, please subscribe to my channel, which is On the World Stage. My name is Marielle, and I'm excited for next time. All right, so Mom, what is something that surprised you when you returned to Japan?
Oh, when we came back, I was shocked by how many foreign tourists there were. Here I was, years ago, maybe the only blonde other people from many different countries were definitely touring when we were. So that
Heard
that
lots
was
of
really,
languages on the street.
Many
That didn't
languages,
happen
yeah,
last time.
and also different foods that were not there years ago from many different nations.
All right, I'm excited for next video. See you next time, and thank you for watching. Bye!
Arigato.
Bye-bye.
Bye.